Hello, good morning, and welcome to today's webinar, Recess and Beyond, Building a Public Affairs Strategy in a Post-Lockdown World. As we go, please do feel free to join in the conversation. You can join us on Twitter, LinkedIn, you can email us, or any other channel you wish to get in touch. And of course, you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and we will have dedicated time at the end for questions. There should be a chat box on your screen in the bottom left-hand corner. Please do ask questions as we go. I am your host, Jake O'Neill. I'm the Head of Marketing here at Vuelio, and I'm delighted to say that we're joined today by three excellent guests. Dr Stuart Thomson from BDB Pitmans. Morning, Stuart.
Morning, how are you going?
Very well, thank you. John Kavanagh from Global Infrastructure Investor Association. Morning, John.
Morning.
And Jane Wallace from Which. Good morning, Jane.
Good morning, everyone.
So today we will be covering the period of time up to recess and how to make the most of recess. Jane, I'm going to start with you. Could you tell me how your public affairs strategy is changing as we leave lockdown and how you're preparing for this next phase of regulation easing?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a Which perspective, obviously lockdown changed hugely the landscape for consumers. So we've been working a lot on issues like profiteering on essential products, food supplies for those who are shielding, and travel refunds. I think now that we're starting to see the easing of lockdown, what we're really noticing is those issues aren't going away necessarily, but we're obviously starting to see a lot of other issues coming to the fore. So trade and that EU-UK relationship are really big issues for Which. And we've obviously seen the government coming quite fast out the trap on the US talks. We're expecting Australia and New Zealand objectives quite soon as well. So from our point of view, it's now that kind of balancing act of keeping up the kind of policy pressure and the insights on how consumers are experiencing things on the ground, but then also starting to look towards that what next and the return of some of that business as usual work as well. Also from a strategy point of view, we're still adapting to Parliament, and I think parliamentarians are still adapting to the world in which they're operating, and we're really noticing that unrest on the backbenchers, particularly on the Conservative backbenchers at the moment, and that's quite a lot of open rebellion and the opportunities that gives on issues where we're looking to push the government for action. There are quite a lot of sympathetic Conservative MPs.
Have you found that there's more champions for your causes now everything is kind of uncertain? Are you finding more people that you can reach out to?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think at the beginning of the kind of COVID crisis, there was obviously the challenge that a lot of new MPs still getting their head around their work, but then also just mailbags or virtual mailbags, I suppose, were absolutely bursting at the seams with constituency inquiries, but really starting to notice that MPs are now starting to look beyond COVID, have the ability to be more active. But yeah, absolutely. I think we're noting an uptick in those who are engaging and happy to be supportive on wider issues.
Excellent. And John, is this something that you're experiencing over at Global Infrastructure?
Yeah, I think so, Jake. On the stakeholder point, so we're spread across three major markets. So the UK, the European Union, and the United States. Although the bailout process in the UK, the stimulus package is kind of coming to an end in the UK, and most of the major announcements have been made. Coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, the kind of bounce back loans, for example. Other jurisdictions are only just picking that up and starting to run with it. So the European Union the European Commission has very recently just announced their kind of support package for the bloc as part of the multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years. So they're building it into a longer-term budget for the European Union wide. And so one of the things that we're doing, and especially on the European side, is to be seeking to engage with those Commission officials, the people that are steering those kind of deliberations, and what are the kinds of issues that we need to raise with them, so that we can get infrastructure as one of the core principles of that budget and that bailout fund. So we're coordinating things like virtual workshops with Commission officials, people within the cabinet of President von der Leyen, for example. We've got one in the middle of July, to try and pick up those issues, so that we're able to kind of monitor where different jurisdictions are with their different packages, and how we can actually seek to get our members and the issues that they care about in front of them, so that they're front and centre of the kinds of policy responses that governments are taking to respond to the pandemic. And I think that'll be a long-term trend. So it's not something that's going to kind of happen overnight. It's going to take months and potentially years to actually ingrain that deep within those strategies. So that's something we're doing on the kind of the EU side.
And I guess that's quite a challenge, having to navigate different markets that are responding at different rates. Of the three markets you're in, dare I ask, which one is do you think responding the best at the moment?
No, it's a good question. It is difficult to keep up to speed with it, especially when you have announcements made on the hoof almost with the kind of President Trump's Twitter activities. I'm sure everyone's aware on this call of that. So, for example, he put out a tweet at the end of May around a $2 trillion US dollar infrastructure bill that was going to be introduced, and so it was kind of like a red alert to us. We were straight on the case. Is there any substance behind this? And it turns out that was just something that he that had come to his mind and that he'd put out. And then so it was a case of actually looking at what the legislation is. There's various bills in the US. I think the UK is a bit further along in terms of that it reacted quite quickly. The EU is building it into a much longer term budget, and I think the US is also just as always quite partisan, quite split on the issue. The Democrats have a set idea about what they think should be included in further stimulus packages, and that doesn't necessarily tally with the Republicans. So it's just keeping abreast of all of those kinds of different issues, really, and making sure that you're informing members and making sure you're ahead of the curve, kind of thing.
Excellent. And Stuart, I guess that communicating to in your case clients and understanding a broad range of responses that they need to be aware of, is that the kind of challenge you're facing at BDB?
There's two, I suppose, ways of thinking about that. The sort of as lockdown eases, what that does to the public affairs strategies. One is in terms of the sort of the logistics of doing the engagement, if you like. So all the MPs, as Jane mentioned, particularly, have been happy to do Zoom calls, and they're very, or even more constituency-based than has been the case in the past. And that's obviously always important, but particularly at the moment, given that range of local issues that are coming from communities and from businesses. So we've got that sort of Zoom bit. But whilst the government and the leader of the House is very happy for MPs to come back to show almost as a sort of a champion, if you like, of business being back as usual. Actually, it isn't the case. You can't hold events, you can't do the normal things that we would do in public affairs to sort of do that engagement. And that's going to be some time before that comes back to normal. So one part is the sort of the engagement side of things. And then the other side of it is more around, where will the priorities for the government be? What are the issues that will come up post-COVID? I think one that we've all got to be extremely aware of is the public inquiry that will happen in some form. So, we don't really have very many details, although there was some speculation last week. But that could drain the life out of political activity for some period of time. So, and will involve an awful lot of organisations. So there's those sorts of things. I won't even mention, it was nice to hear John talk about Europe, but I won't mention sort of Brexit at this stage, but that's obviously still ongoing, but that's one side. But also it's the relationship between different parts of the economy, and I include charities in that as well as businesses, that all this has sort of thrown up. So because government has been there and supporting, at some point that relationship will start to change. And again, as both the other speakers have mentioned, that the support that the government has been put in there has been fantastic, but it won't be there forever. What comes after? At what point do businesses start paying back at what point do the support mechanisms come to an end? And then for charities and other organisations, local authorities and others, what are they expected to pick up? So they've had the support as well, or, and some have claimed it, better than others sectors. But what is the support that they will need to be? So there's these sorts of issues that will start to come out, and that we all need to think about. What is our role in that? What are our positions on that? And start talking to government about them, frankly, because they're after ideas. They need the help. The big stimulus package, which may well come to light at the end of end of this month, beginning of next, sort of thing, is possibly one of the biggest announcements this government will do in its entire time in office. So, lots to think about in that sense.
And do you think, because everything is still in I guess, crisis mode, and the government is responding as if in crisis, is it about being reactive to when those next announcements are coming up, or is it about being proactive and still finding ways, via virtual means, to get your issues on the agenda?
My view on these things is always best to be proactive anyway. I mean, if you're reactive, then your government don't have time to think about what's happening. Where if you sort of provide them with the information and put the idea to them, solutions to them, you just always you've got a much better chance of being successful rather than just simply reactive to issues. So I would be thinking very much about, look, what is that? The economy of the future, the charity relationship with government that we want to see, the role of local government, or whichever sector people are on this call are happen to be involved in. What is it that they want from that, and go to government and suggest things to them, because otherwise, simply they're just not going to be able to, be able to control that agenda, really. So,
excellent. And you mentioned quite a lot of the virtual means that MPs and Parliament is quite happy to allow at the moment. How much longer do you think that will continue? Because there's going to be a period of time where perhaps in-person events are still not possible, but the virtual means have fallen out of favour. Do you think there's going to be a crossover, or do you think we're going to carry on with virtual now that people are quite comfortable doing that?
I'm sure others have got views. I think my view is that they'll be reasonably comfortable doing it, and I think there will be a period where people you don't want to have unnecessary travel around. So if that is quicker to get to the heart of an issue, and you don't need to put people in the same room or travel to it, that will be fine. But I think actually, I know this was pre-COVID, but I think one of the social media reports that you guys did, Vuelio did, which focused on the role of social media. So I paraphrase hugely here, apologies, but social media is great and it works well with particular audiences. But actually, MPs in particular like their face-to-face. They like that event.
Yeah.
I don't see that changing fundamentally. Although what we can actually do in a period of time, I think is it might be smaller group, it might be more round table. We might not have the sort of the more bigger social type events in Parliament that we've been used to. So I think things will change, but the kernel of that face-to-face networking, learning about things, I think will still be there.
Excellent. And Jane, if I come back to you, with the stakeholders that perhaps you're finding it easier to reach at the moment, or perhaps they're a little unsettled and so are more sympathetic to what you're wishing to talk about, are these conversations you're having virtually? Are you thinking ahead to the next month or so when lockdown eases further, to how you can, book meeting rooms perhaps for face-to-face work?
Of course. At the moment, all entirely virtual, and actually I think there have been some positives within that. Certainly we found in a case where you'd be finding, say, ministers and senior politicians, you'd be looking at trying to book meetings in 8 to 12 weeks' time, and instead we're finding that they can do it that week or the next week. Especially from an accessible point, and as Stuart says, you don't have that travel time, people aren't passing through security. It is a lot more efficient, but absolutely you are losing that face-to-face side. Personally, I can't see. I think organisations are struggling enough to get some staff, to be able to set up to have some staff within their workplace. I think we're quite a long way off then being able to invite external stakeholders in for face-to-face meetings. So, I think certainly up until September, I think will be completely online. And even, to be honest, I think going into the autumn, I think it will stay online, but you might start to see, as Stuart says, that kind of trickle through a few smaller face-to-face meetings. But I think the idea that, we're going to be able to hold those big events, that it isn't going to happen for some time, and that is a challenge from a public affairs point of view, and how we really get beyond that bubble, because obviously we're talking to our colleagues and we're talking to people that we usually talk to, but I think at those events you pick up so much, you're chatting to people in side discussions, and currently that is lacking. So I think there's a challenge there in how we challenge ourselves to ensure that we are, reading different things, looking at different ways of communicating, so that we can try and break through that, so we aren't kind of doing everything in our own kind of contextual bubble.
Excellent. And those big face-to-face opportunities to meet, I am going to bring up conference. I just wondered, Jane, if we start with you, likelihood of it going ahead, it all being online, with some sort of alternative? What do you think?
I think it will all be online, but I think there'll be quite a lot of appetite for online events, and again, opportunities to be creative. But yeah, I think it will be going online.
And
John, same question to you.
Yeah, I think it's highly doubtful that anything will be happening in person, Jake. I think there'd be a bit of a small scale revolution if the football season was forced to be played behind closed doors, but then thousands of kind of politicos and party members were able to attend conference. So I can't see it happen in person. Whether something happens virtually or not, I'm not sure. But I do know that the business relations teams for each of the major parties are very much kind of finger on the pulse with this, and they're thinking about if it is being held virtually, then that's great. But if not, could something be held potentially in the early part of next year? So you might see something in the spring, for example. So yeah, I mean, people should keep their eyes peeled, but not hold out hope for being able to travel to any city this year for conference.
And with conference, your activity as you plan as we approach conference season, are you finding that you've now got this big void where perhaps in previous years you'd be focusing on conference activity and plans for conference?
Yes, I think so. I think as Jane was saying, it's definitely more difficult in terms of not having that face-to-face interaction, and I'm sure plenty of people on the call are in the same kind of boat with that. I think that recess is obviously quite a good time when MPs aren't sitting to maybe think about who are the kinds of people within your extended network. So maybe going through your LinkedIn contacts, going through your Black Book, thinking about who are the people that you haven't spoke to in a while, maybe thinking about setting up like a virtual call with them, and just making sure that you don't let your network kind of go stale, and that you're continuing to engage and doing that intelligence gathering exercise, because all of those relationships will be useful and fruitful for you when things go back to the kind of the new normal in the future. So it's making the most of the virtual software, I think, to just keep that network in check and maintained.
Perfect, and that kind of brings us nicely onto recess. We've got about a month until recess is supposed to start. Stuart, if I come to you, what can you do in this? What can our audience do in this last month before recess to really make the most of the time before, we then start looking at, I guess, stakeholder mapping, horizon scanning, and all the fundamentals of public affairs? What can we do in this next month before we reach recess?
I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is, look, we can already see, the way that the issues that government is encountering and will continue to encounter to just get society working a bit more normally again, really. So it's not just about the economy, although that is a big driver, but across the piece. So what is it that you want, and then what is it you can offer? What are the support you need, and then look at the people you need to talk to. So that's not not going to change hugely, but particularly with that sort of budget, whatever they end up calling it, come July. That's the biggie. That's the real thing that we've got to focus on. That will take us through. Because effectively, if you think about it, I mean, Johnson had a month or so, 2 months sort of thing. After the election, big election win, unexpected size of majority. Gets Brexit done. and then the whole thing stops. So effectively, so far, you've only had about 2 months of being a normal government. So the other part to think about is not just that, getting out of COVID, but actually for a government that needs to be re-elected, come, in 4 or 5 years' time, depending on what they do with the Fixed Term Parliament Act. At some point, it needs to look like a government that has a range of ideas across other issues and can start to do the normal business of government. So I think even now, even in this piece just before, recess, it has to be that. And and as you just sort of talked about with John and Jane, that piece around what replaces, and probably does replace, party conference. And even if they have the party conferences in some online form, actually, as organisations, do you really want to be too much involved in that? What do you normally do at conference? And it's to sort of get to larger numbers. Well, if those larger numbers aren't there, if you can't talk to those people, those different types, different levels, if you like, within each of the parties, do you want to do that? So I think there's some tactical questions there to think about. And then looking into next year, these sorts of examples, and again, John mentioned they might do something in spring, but you've already got spring conferences and regional conferences and national conferences in Scotland and Wales, etc. So there are other opportunities there. So actually, you just need to think about your timetable and maybe just look for those wider opportunities and just shift the horizons out a little bit as well. So that's what I would do in the immediate month anyway.
Excellent. We've had a couple of questions coming in already, and don't forget you can ask questions in the chat box. John, I'm gonna put this one on you to start with. What do you think the impact of the current situation will be on lobbying regulation in future? With registers probably didn't consider that they'd be engaging digitally so much. Do they need updating? And is there opportunity for more robust regulation? And is it needed?
I think so personally. It's a good question. They very much the registers don't reflect the kind of new reality that we're going to face. So with things like select committees in Parliament having been held virtually over the last couple of months, you've got even at the local government level that Stuart was talking about, you've got local councils, for example, holding their meetings virtually on Skype, and members of the public able to join in on online software. So those registers need to kind of move with the times, I would suggest, and whether it's a case of those organisations that hold the pen on the registers, maybe inserting an extra clause around the way that virtual advocacy is now taking place. I did a piece for CIPR for their Influence magazine around virtual advocacy. So I think that's probably a theme that the registers need to kind of be ahead of the curve on and start to maybe think about building into their actual kind of constitutions.
Excellent. Jane, I'm going to come to you with this one. Have you revised your public affairs budgets to reflect fewer events and more focus on digital?
That's a very good question. So we're actually just coming towards the end of our financial year, so we have been looking at what comes next. And yes, we had actually been looking forward to doing lots of events in the coming months, but we have already started kind of scoping into digital events instead, and digital roundtables, and they have been really successful, and we've been getting a lot out of them and found there's a real appetite for them. So yeah, so it's certainly into our planning between now and the end of this calendar year that our budget will be slightly different, but also looking at, giving that scope, I think, for us to take that time in recess to think actually creatively what can we be doing, and if that needs budget behind it, that we do still have that scope within it.
Excellent. I'm also going to ask you this one, and Stuart, I'm going to come to you on this one in a second as well. But Jane, if ask you first, that when you're engaging people virtually, that's one thing, but what about your stakeholders who are less likely to dial into webinars or Zoom calls? Are there any ways to engage those people that perhaps aren't so keen on the virtual technology methods?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been putting a lot of time into the fact is, we're all different. Everybody works differently, and people respond to different things. So I think it's really important to have a suite of different offers. So yeah, we can do video conferences and we can do calls, but also we've been doing a lot on consolidating, which does a huge amount of insight and data work, and also just simply by the fact that we do, not actual face-to-face currently, but a lot of engagement with consumers, how we can kind of bring that together and make it as accessible as possible. So I think there's absolutely space for videos. We've been doing a lot on our online content as well. So we're pushing out through Twitter, but also some of the platforms that we have to be able to point stakeholders to, but also within those briefing documents as well, providing that data for those that have that kind of focus, but then also talking through our policy step by step, so that people can basically use it as they wish and engage. And just the ultimate thing for us, obviously, is getting our point across and opening up that dialogue, be it verbal or otherwise.
Brilliant. It's an incredible amount you're doing. It sounds really busy. Stuart, I was going to ask you if you've got any additional tips for reaching those hard to reach virtual people. It sounds like Jane's already doing quite a lot.
Yeah. So she's done all the best lines. We in public affairs, it could be argued, have been quite traditional in the way that we do our communications and engagements. So it's quite briefing paper and meetings and those sort of things. So in some ways, this has meant that we've had to up our game. But I think, if there's a benefit from any of what's been going on, is actually, again, as Jane mentioned, using those various communications channels, working with other communications colleagues to do more video content, do shorter clips, think more creatively about the, those sort of, online smaller conferences, round tables or whatever. But also we have to remember that we have to build that audience as well. The audience, same as, you guys know, when you do a webinar, you don't sort of instantly stick content out there and people miraculously join in. You have to push it, you have to promote it, you have to do a few, and then it becomes part of accepted practice. And we're very much in that sort of stage. We have to build or educate. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but work with the political audiences to say that you can do these things, and it is perfectly secure, and you can have good engagement, and you can get the information that you need. So I do that. And I think, and it's what Jane mentioned, but I think John alluded to earlier as well, which is about making the most of your strength. So being very clear that, we are the absolute experts. We have this information, and we can put it out to you in those various ways, using those various channels, and we will make sure that we get to you rather than expecting you to come to us. So we absolutely have to bear that in mind and push that more and more during this period.
Excellent. So I guess trailblazers, and everyone is a trailblazer, and getting everyone on board with a new way of doing things, at least for the short term. We have actually reached the half-hour mark, but I'm going to finish with, and I'd ideally like just a one-word answer from you each. Stuart, I'll start with you. Will the Brexit deadline be extended beyond the end of the year?
I'm going to, but in one word, looking like it at the moment, no.
Excellent. John?
I agree with Stuart.
And Jane?
Yeah, I'm in agreement as well.
Across the board, goodness me. So we've got three.
We can all be wrong together.
We'll do another one of these January 1st next year and see how we got on. But that's perfect. Thank you three for joining us this morning and providing so much. The time always just really flies. Thank you to our audience as well for joining us this morning. A recording of this will be available and be sent out to you. All that's left for me to say thank you, and we hope you join the next one. Thank you.